Hi everyone. Wow, it's been such a long time since I've done something like this. I think I finished the Sci-Fi Feminist podcast about 3 years ago, was the last time I did an episode. So this isn't really an official episode. It won't be available on Apple or Spotify or any of those places. But this is an interview I had with an author named Erin E. Adams about her new book called Jackal. It is something that I did for my blog, and you can read the script on the blog if you would like to. But we did record the interview, and I did want to put it on YouTube for those who wanted to listen to the full interview. So, yeah, here it is. I hope you enjoy it. And sorry for being so quiet for such a long time. I've been very busy in the past 3 years, but I'm trying to get the blog up and running again. And hopefully, in the future, too, I'll be taking up the podcast again. But as always, thank you very much for listening. And yes, enjoy this interview that I had with Erin Adams. Thank you. Okay, great. Okay, so could you please introduce yourself, give us some background, like where do you come from, what do you do? Yeah, some
Yeah.
context about you.
Okay. Hi. My name is Erin E. Adams. I'm a first generation Haitian American living in currently in New York City. I am a mostly thriller, horror, mystery, suspense kind of writer. I'm a novelist. I'm also a playwright. I write, my plays tend to dabble in a bit into the surreal and also somehow are mysteries. So, if anything, I stay on brand. I currently live in New York City, but I grew up in and around rural Pennsylvania with my mother. And yeah, what else? What else is there to know about me? I used to be an actress. Oh yeah, this is fun. I was an actress professionally for over 10 years.
Wow.
And then turned to writing at this point about 5 years ago, or turned back to writing. My first degrees are in writing, and I went to go act for a long time. And I turned back to writing just as a way of reclaiming a bit of my my art, like my art. And all this happened. So it was so yeah, that I guess is probably the best way that I can describe myself.
Great.
Yeah.
And why did you stop acting? Was it just because you felt the need to just have a creative outlet again in the form of writing, or was there a specific reason?
So believe it or not, for the first 2 years of like not just returning to writing, but then trying to turn the writing professional, um, I was still acting. I was this mad woman still taking auditions in between like doing edits. And I survived about 2 years of that. And I basically, it's like writing was just demanding more of my time and was supporting me financially. So
Wow.
I'm like, one of these has to go, and it's
Mm.
going to be the one that just isn't doing as much. So it was a very difficult decision, but in the end, I do think it was the right choice to make. Was I'm like, writing is just asking for more of me, and I'm like, okay, let's go.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, if the avenues are there and if the doors are open, then why not?
Yeah.
Um, So, can you give us some background on some of the novels that you've written, and especially Jackal? I know is the really big one. Like, can you give us some background on that? And yeah, just like your kind of history as a writer.
Sure. So Jackal is my first and only published novel so far.
Okay.
I am currently working on my second novel, but Jackal came. It was this very strange. So it came out of like a post 2016 America, and I was having a difficult time because, like I said, I grew up in rural Pennsylvania, which I do not know how much your podcast listeners know about American politics. I feel like it's so narcissistic to just assume everybody knows everything. But
Well, I'm in
long
South Africa and I follow the politics in America.
okay, okay. Long story short, Pennsylvania got really important in 2016. It's a
Hmm.
swing state and it swung very heavily Republican for the first time in
Okay.
years. And my hometown specifically, which my hometown is Johnstown, is the town the book is set in. It was for a long time a like diehard bastion for working class Democrats. And
Hmm.
in 26, the month leading up to the election, it had a record number of brand new Republicans registered. And
Wow.
the this like little blue dot in this very red area became red. And at that point, I was living in New York, and people were really giving the Rust Belt a hard time. They're like, oh, people there are dumb, they're backward, they don't know anything. And I'm like, that's not it. Um,
Hmm.
there's so much more going on, and the media at the time was definitely not helping. uh,
Hmm.
and I'm just like, you guys, this is not like this isn't there's so much more nuance. There's like it's also we're in the mountains. There's like probably a little bit of magic in there too, you guys. We have to so just in an attempt to try and like explain myself in my hometown, I just started working on this urban legend, for lack of a better term. And I love folklore, I love urban legends because they are what we as a community, they're stories that we create to answer these unanswerable questions, to deal with
Hmm.
these big terrifying ideas and these big terrifying events. And so I set out to do that for a bit for my hometown itself, but also a bit for like America, like what
Hmm.
is the urban legend of America? And this is what happened. And so like that's kind of where Jackal came from. It also comes from uh, just the idea of home. There's been a lot of I mean, the book itself is a homecoming, and it's about what happens when you come home and you don't feel safe, and
Hmm.
you don't feel that kind of like embrace that we're expecting. What happens when it's the opposite, which is an experience I have had, and I would also say that a lot of Black Americans have had, being
Hmm.
American. um, it's like what happens when home is a place of horror. And so
Hmm.
that's really what pushed Jackal into this delightful horror baby that it is. So
And you mentioned urban legends. What is the specific urban legend? So I read the synopsis. It's about the
mhm,
disappearance of a few young Black girls in
mhm,
the town. So,
yeah.
like, what urban legends do that tie into? Uh,
Yes. So I did as you can imagine, a bunch of research on urban legends. And one of the
mm,
best things about them is that they're somehow super specific, but also ubiquitous. Like there's apparently a school bus crash legend that is just in every small town in America. And they usually reflect some larger anxiety in society. And, I can go on and on about that. But they, so while there is not anything specific, and thank God there is not a string of missing Black girls in my hometown,
yeah.
there is a constant theme of like missing and murdered and tortured children in
Oh,
urban legends.
yeah.
uh Basically it's like I researched a bunch of them and then kind of amalgamated them into something. And yes, the book is focusing specifically on missing Black women and girls in America, and how there's just not as much media attention, there's not
Mm,
as much law enforcement attention, and how there is this unfortunate, well, not even unfortunate, this awful series of excuses that just get thrown in people's faces. And
mm,
that is horrifying. Like, talk
it
about
is.
home as horror.
Mm,
These systems that are supposed to protect us often don't extend to Black women and girls. And that in and of itself is horrifying.
And that is that still the reality in America that you experience now?
I would say absolutely. I
Um,
know that there have been many attempts. There's been movements. There's been, I feel like every few months, unfortunately, there's like one black girl who gets a bunch of attention and everyone's like, hey, this is a problem. And then a couple of things happen and then we collectively forget. And then it just kind of rolls back around. So yeah, I would say that it's definitely still a problem.
and your novel, you described it as a new wave of socially conscious horror. Is kind of the, well, not the purpose, but part of your reason for writing this. Is there some form of like not protest, but to create some awareness of these types of things or to highlight the issue? Is that some of your intention in writing a novel like this?
Absolutely, it is absolutely to call attention to this because it's been happening. It keeps happening. There's in my research an unfortunate abundance of cases like this. Like
Mhm.
every time I would try to go and plot something, I'm like, oh, I think that's just too much, and then I'd go and find the research that directly backs it up. Um,
Um,
so I'm just like, never mind, not too much, keep going. So yeah, it is in a way like oh, it is drawing attention to, but it
mm,
is not solving the problem. Like
yeah.
that is I feel like the like it's I'm blanking on the word. It's early for me. Sorry. It's the difficulty of writing something that is socially conscious is that while it's you can draw attention to, you can highlight, you can pull up this fabric of society. It's also that unfortunately you can't solve it most of the time, which is
Yeah.
frustrating.
Yeah, and
Mm.
usually that depends on like, yeah, much larger yeah, stakeholders.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
usually those institutions that need to institute the change, they don't.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Um, so the third question, why use horror specifically to deal with these
Mm-hmm.
social issues? I love science fiction. It's my podcast called the Sci-Fi Feminist because I love
Yeah.
sci-fi, because sci-fi has this ability to, it's far enough into a hypothetical future that makes it acceptable, radical ideas acceptable to us as an audience because it's hypothetical, but also it has this ability to really deal with some taboo subjects. So I'm
Mhm.
wondering, like horror, does it have a similar power for you? Why use horror specifically?
I mean, so I would argue that like all the genres have their thing that they're really good at,
Mm,
and something that horror is really good at is making people uncomfortable, and it thrives in the discomfort. And I would say that when you go and engage with horror, you expect it. Like you're like, oh, I'm going
mm,
to be uncomfortable, maybe the entire time that I am
mm,
engaging with this. And that is so important because in that discomfort is where you can really start to talk about things. You can talk about
yeah,
things that you're like, oh, we just, we don't talk about that. It's like, oh, and horror has a long history of talking about stuff we're not supposed to talk about, bringing up things that are taboo that might be, oh, that's too much, that's too personal. Um,
mm,
and horror also has a tendency to highlight systems of power, these systems that we think are in place for our betterment, and either
yeah,
like highlight them to be like, hey, you guys ever hear about this? Or to turn them on their heads.
yeah,
So, in Jackal, it's something where like at some point in the novel, the police become an antagonistic force. And it's like, oh, this system that's supposed to be keeping people safe is not keeping people safe.
mm,
And it's like, how do you work around that? And I think especially when you are a marginalized person, you're so used to those systems not supporting you
yeah,
that it's it's a really nice way to be able to highlight that and show that without feeling like you're being too quote unquote preachy or
Mm,
just I would argue like preachy, because people like turn off to that. I could even
yeah,
feel myself sometimes engaging with things. I'm like, oh, this message is important, but it's being yelled at me, so I don't want to listen.
yeah, that
And
is yeah,
yeah, so
music,
I think
yeah,
yeah, so like horror is a really good way of, quite frankly, I feel like when you go like through the side door, you can get super preachy. But
without people
the
even being noticed, they're being preached at.
yeah,
You know,
yeah. It's a
yeah.
great way of being quote unquote like, of really hammering home a point about society without feeling like, without hammering. It's like you're like it's great. So
Yeah.
that for me is why I think horror, social horror is having a moment, so to speak. I think it's here to stay because I love it. And I just think it's very effective.
Mm, mm. And do you read a lot of horror? Like, what are your influences?
Oh goodness, I feel like everyone asked me this, and then immediately
It's
everything just like flies out of your head. So I do read a lot of. I mean, I read very widely and
yeah,
sporadically, but I would say like my influences have been like everyone from like Toni Morrison and Beloved, Octavia Butler,
yeah.
Stephen Graham Jones, who else? Victor Lavelle, obviously. My brain is just slowly
Yeah, it's
rebooting.
like when people ask,
Um,
"What are your favorite bands?" and then you can't think of one.
you can't
It's
think
like,
of a single band; they all go to your head.
yeah.
What else? Oh, N.K. Jemisin. I love her world building.
Mm.
And that is it for today. That's what I got.
So it's a pretty good list. Yeah. And I was just also thinking as you were speaking, the title Jackal.
Mhm.
What's with the title? Why
Yeah.
did you decide on that title?
Yeah, so this title. So it's many things. I would say without spoiling so much of the book, it does fall into the category of like the monster is the title. So there's a tiny clue.
Mm.
Uh, but it also it's two other things. One is, jackals are scavengers. They are these like African dogs that scavenge stuff. And when you are in a place of lacking, you can feel like you're fighting over scraps.
Uh,
And I especially felt growing up in the Rust Belt that you feel that. You feel
yeah.
like there can be such a lack of resources that people are fighting over scraps. They're fighting over nothing.
Mm.
And then also, we're in the Rust Belt. Why in the world is there an African dog here? um, it's something, it's also speaking to the erasure of diversity. There is absolutely diversity in the Rust Belt. And whenever I tell people, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm from this like little town in Pennsylvania, they're like, what? There's black people there? And I'm like, of course there's black people there. Like, what are you talking about? So
Sure.
it's also highlighting that quote unquote disconnect where it's like,
Yeah.
why is this here? It's not supposed to be here. So
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. So many layers actually
Hmm.
to it.
Yeah.
Um, and how do you experience being a Black female author in a um, like even when we list authors, it's usually white males historically
Hmm.
have been
Yeah.
in art, in literature, and everything. It's white male dominated.
Mhm.
So being a Black female author in this kind of historically, field that historically marginalized women and Black people, especially.
Mhm.
How do you experience that?
Well, okay, so I would say that first off, publishing, all of publishing has this issue.
Yeah.
It's not just horror. Um, but I will say that two things that horror itself, I think because horror itself has a history of being marginalized within publishing, that
Yeah.
while there are obviously, there are people who, could try to continue to marginalize more diverse voices, they are just a vocal minority. I have found that most horror creators and most horror readers are like on board for just everything. They're like, yes, bring me everything. Readers want more diverse stories. Publishers
Yeah.
want more diverse stories. Um, However, I say that with the huge caveat of, I know that I have directly benefited from the tons of people before me who
Mm,
have come in and made space and kept the door open. That
yeah.
is so important. When I came into publishing, number one, there was I think either was the first or second list where um, they had just Black women in horror, and there's just literally a list of like over 100, and I think now it's at over
Wow.
200 Black women in horror, and it's like, here, you wonder where we are? We are all right
Yeah.
here on this list. And there's just such a community that I was already walking into. There's also, in the
Mm,
mystery thriller community, there's crime writers of color. And so coming in, I already had these networks where, and so much of publishing can feel so just like impenetrable. And so much of the time you just need somebody to like send a message and say, hey, is this normal? What what does this mean? And I just have people to do that. And
wow.
I already know that if I was coming in without those resources, I'd be in a very different place.
Yeah.
I also benefited from being able to really choose a team of an agent and an editor and an imprint that really supports me. Um,
Mm,
and that, is unfortunately like just luck. I think it's just sheer luck at this point to be able to get so much of those things in a row. So there is so much more that has to be changed. Like if you look at I haven't even looked at the numbers recently, but it's like the amount of just Black people in publishing is like a fraction of a percentage,
yeah.
and yet there is such pushback, and it's like, oh well, there's so many. I'm like, there's like literally 5. What are you talking about? Like,
Yeah.
in like for me, I will not be happy until like we are, splitting hairs with the amount of diverse people in publishing, like until there are so many people doing what somebody else is doing that it's like, oh well, there's like 15 of this kind of storytelling. And I
Yeah.
think something that's really important to changing things is just readers. Honestly, for readers to be vocal about diverse stories and to support diverse stories and to tell publishers, hey, we like this. We want more of this.
Yeah.
Because that is what's really going to change things.
Yeah. I've found it many times, readers that complain, oh, there's not enough diversity, but then you do publish something
Yeah.
that is diverse and then they don't want to read it. It's a very strange, I don't know if you've experienced that, but
Yeah, no, I've definitely experienced that. People will very audibly complain, like, "Oh, everything is the same, and why is it all the same over and over again?" And I'm like, "There's so here, I'm like, here are all the books that are totally different
mm,
from what you usually read. Like, read those books, support them. If you
mm,
like them, tell all of your friends, tell your library, tell your book clubs. Like, it's unfortunately, it's like publishing is a business, and
yeah,
numbers and money talk. And so
mm,
if more readers are not just verbally demanding, but like putting their dollar down,
yeah,
demanding for more diverse work, things will change faster. So
yeah. No,
yeah.
absolutely. Yeah. And I was just thinking of this while you were speaking, but you say it's luck that you got into this, but how did you get actually into writing and publishing? I know you said you studied it at university. Like, how did you, like,
Kind
can you give
of.
some advice maybe for people that
Oh,
would like to get into this? Like, where do you
okay.
even start?
Okay. Oh, wow. Okay. So my journey here is like strange. So I have 3 degrees. None of them are in what I do. So I started writing plays like that. My writing was playwriting.
Mm,
And oh God, how in the world did this happen? It's like I did playwriting, I did a bunch of acting, and when I turned back to writing initially 5 years ago, it was playwriting, and I was just like tinkering with prose stuff on the side because part of my writing degree in playwriting, you had to like study all the everything else. So I had some training in prose. And it was just sort of like, short stories and things. I'm like, oh, I think I
mm,
have like an idea of like a manuscript. Let's see, I don't know. And okay, so like long story short, I entered a mentorship contest on Twitter. I know.
wow.
And I got the mentorship.
Wow.
And that it was called Pitch Wars. It is done now, unfortunately, but it was a volunteer run mentorship where you paired unagented people had manuscripts with authors who were either agented or had been published so they could help guide the revision of the
Mm,
manuscript to get it to be something a bit more ready for the industry. And I did that. I did really well out of that. I would say because of my participation in Pitch Wars, I got a ton of offers of representation.
wow.
There was a lot of buzz around the novel when we went on submission to publishers, and so I like got a really great publisher. So it's something where, and then that just snowballed things from there.
Mm,
I would say that I have to be very careful with how I use the word luck. Is that in some ways, every time I think about it, I'm like, without knowing, without thinking of it, I was training for this my entire life. Like I
yeah.
have a metric ton of experience working on characters. I have a ton of experience working on plotting. I have a ton of experience working on text, working on dialogue, working on prose. So to pivot from acting to novel writing, while it may seem like, whoa, it actually, for me, just makes so much sense. I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
I have all these skills. Let's just turn them over here for a bit. Um,
Mm,
so while there are obviously luck is involved, I think success comes from uh, discipline and
yeah.
talent and craft. And
Yeah.
I just happened to have all those things. And then there was like luck came in.
Mm,
Because oof, believe me, when luck comes and you are not ready, it's very, very painful. Uh,
yeah.
I would say if there's any advice that I can offer somebody, I would say this. I would say do not try to write to the market. It's impossible. There's no way you can do it. Things take so much time to go through the publishing machine that you'll be out of the quote unquote market before it comes out. Write the
Mm,
things that keep you awake all night. Write the things that you are obsessive over because you're going to need that borderline obsession to
yeah.
get the thing done.
Yeah.
And also, I think people can sense that. They can sense when it's like, oh, this person like really likes this. They really,
Yeah.
really like this.
Yeah.
And I would say readers respond to that more than, it's like, oh, this person, took a bunch of buzzwords and put them into a book. It's like, no,
Mm,
they just were genuinely obsessed with this and wrote this story. So I
mm,
would say that it's like write the things that you just either need in the world or things that like are that you're fascinated by because the amount of times I've heard I'm working my next project I'm working on, I've heard like, oh, the market is oversaturated, blah blah blah, but I'm just like, but just you're not gonna do it the way I'm gonna do it. Like you're not gonna
yeah.
and
Yeah.
I've seen it time and time again of somebody just coming in with this like you're like, what is that? I need it in my life kind of idea.
Yeah.
And people respond really well to that.
Yeah, I think it comes down to authenticity.
Yeah.
And I think especially we're in an age where a lot of the things are, written by computers, and the creative industry has become very diluted in terms of real work. So I think once you write something that's really authentic, that's really you, people respond to that, because we're really used to seeing very like generalized things, and really like chat GPT written things, what I mean.
Yeah, it's like, just, I would argue this is a lesson for all parts of your life, but it's like, the best version of you to be is just you, is yourself.
Yeah.
Like, that is the one that people are going to respond the best to. And
Mm.
I would argue it's like, you're going to find, people talk about finding readers and all that. It's like, you're going to find, your readers don't want they don't want the chat GPT version of you. They want you. Like, they want hear your thoughts, what you think.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And yeah, final question. Can you give us like a glimpse into your future projects, future plans? What's happening next for you?
Yeah, so next, like most pressingly next, my second novel, that's what I'm working on right now. I'm in the final bits of it. It's called One of You. It is my attempt at reclaiming the Haitian zombie mythology. I feel like zombies in Haiti got really, just the US just kind of took it and ran with it. And
just took everything out of context.
I know, I was just like, what are you doing? And the
Yeah.
actual horror inherent to that is more, zombie is so much more personal and intimate, and like, you have to know the person to turn them into a zombie. Like, it's something that is much more like close to the chest. So One of You is about these two first generation Haitian immigrant sisters who are living in New York City. They are living the American dream. Their parents, they came over here, they worked really hard. Their mother passes away mysteriously under, mysterious circumstances. And after her death, all of these like family secrets just start spilling out and start to threaten everything that they and their parents have worked for, and their American dream starts to become a nightmare.
Okay.
So that is One of You. So yeah, that's my second book. That's what I'm doing all day, every day. Until,
that sounds like a really exciting one, and it's also a horror, in the horror genre.
Yeah, I feel like it's very, what did we talk about? We said like gothic, because it's going domestic. So if Jackal is about the systemic violences that happen to us, One of You is about the more intimate violences that happen in families. We're taking the microscope and like really getting right down to the nitty gritty.
Well, I really hope we can have an interview again when that's to talk to you again. Thank you so much for sharing your insights. I think this was really, really great, and I think people are really going to enjoy listening to this and reading this on the blog.